Good morning, everyone. John, I don't know if you were going to kick this thing off.
If you want, I could do the first couple slides for you, just to set the tone for the group. You have those first few in here, right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I'll go through those first and then hand it off to you.
All right. Sounds good. Let me know when you're ready.
All right. Yeah, go ahead. We'll go to the next one. Welcome, everybody, to our Digital Services Forum. Today, we're going to have Scott Hadaway running the meeting. And if today's your first time on the meeting, I know a lot of times, depending on the topics, we'll get new people in or people that may bring you along that have been attending for a while. So if it is your first time, can you just go into the chat and post your name and the company you're from, and then a little bit about what you do. This way the group members can see who's on and maybe have a little chat. A lot of what this group brings to some people is establishing those connections so you can have those ongoing conversations with people who are doing similar things to what you're doing. Well, we'll get to Scott in a minute. We go to the next slide. I'll tell you a little bit about the group. So the Digital Services Forum, we've had it going on since 2018. And we started with 2 people, but our vision has evolved over that time. And we first focused exclusively on digital services and the model for digital services inside of the CMDB. But since we went further and we said, what are we actually building these services for? And it mostly came down to digital transformation. So our vision is really around that digital transformation and helping build the models out for that. So our mission is to enable the members so that they can participate in those efforts that are in their companies. And we want to share as much work as we can. That's the idea here, is to not let everybody stumble over the same things. So if there's a presentation you have, there's a little bit of code you have that you can put towards the group, that's what we want to do. All of that work will be out on our share drive, and I'll give you a little more information on that on the next slide. The enterprise architecture team, and you'll hear from one of our teammates today, Scott will be speaking, but we're the ones that host the content, but as much as we can, we try to get people that are actually doing this, people in the field, customers like yourselves, and co-present with them. So if there are topics that you have that you think will be relevant to this group of people, we definitely want to hear from you. And we do have a meeting every other week. We stay pretty consistent with those meetings, except for the holidays get a little bit tricky, but we do try to keep it bi-weekly so that there's a consistency there, and we keep them at hour-long meetings, except for special events. We might have a workshop, or we might do something at Knowledge that is outside that hour. We go to the next slide, Scott.
So I got a feeling I may have taken out your next slide.
Right,
they went straight to the agenda.
All yours. You can take it from here then.
All right. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll make sure that you get the links to the share and to the YouTube channel, et cetera, that John was referring to. Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Hadaway. A little bit about myself. I joined ServiceNow in 2013. Prior to that, I was a remedy person going back to the mid-90s. For those that know, there was a couple of acquisitions. We moved from Peregrine to ServiceNow, or to BMC, and then I left BMC in 2013 and joined ServiceNow. I have been a senior advisory solution consultant for the bulk of my tenure at ServiceNow, and took on the enterprise architect role in November of 2022. My manager, Peter Caldwell, is on the phone. He also runs the enterprise architecture team that I'm a member of. He's waving. Couple of things about me. I'm not an expert in anything. except who to go to when I need help, right? So the number one skill set I bring to the table is that I know who's doing what on the platform. I am fairly well versed on the platform, and as a result, I will sometimes make statements that are related to my time in the field, right? Some of my customers have been Intel, Safeway, Boeing, Disney, etc. And as a result of that, I've kind of been in many different areas and into different aspects of the platform. And as a result, sometimes I'll make declarative statements. I want to say right off the bat that if I say something that is not 100% in line with documentation from ServiceNow, I will do my best to call out that I'm giving you my opinion. But generally, if I'm making a statement, it's because I truly believe it, not because it's necessarily 100% right. So you'll notice on this agenda, there's a dash group on each item of this. That is my invitation to you. If you have a question, if you have some input, this is a group effort. Please do not hesitate to reach out. I believe we have a couple of surveys that are going to come up, and if not, there is a couple of places where I'm going to ask questions for the group, and I'll ask you to put your answers in chat. We're going to go through a quick overview of business continuity management. We're going to go through a refresher of the CSDM, mainly because the next section is where we talk about how business continuity management and common service data model interact with one another. I'm going to give you some technical considerations. Again, these are based in experiences I've had. My most recent interaction was with Hawaii Medical Services Association, 2-year process to deploy their CSDM and business continuity management. And one of the things you'll find is that it's continuing to ongo. And I'm hoping that today's presentation is a jumping off point, because I want to bring that customer on the phone and let you guys all learn from the path that they've been on. And then finally, some best practices at the end. Neither of those last two lists are inclusive or exclusive. So there's going to be more, and a little bit of that's on purpose so that we can start a good conversation. So if there's no questions yet, let's dive in to business continuity management. I'm going to jump to the bottom, right? Because I want to set the stage right off the bat. A lot of people hear business continuity management, but they think disaster recovery, right? And I talk about disaster recovery as part of business continuity management, just as an emergency brake is part of a car. You don't run around using your emergency brake every time you want to stop, right? It is a key aspect. Recovery is a key aspect of it. But overall, business continuity management, it outlines the planning process more than anything else. And it's meant to develop prior arrangements and those procedures that everybody is aware of and agrees on, that allows you to respond to an event in such a manner that all of your business functions continue within the plan levels during a disruption. And it includes the following things: your policies and strategies, the business impact assessment, the risk assessment, ongoing validation and testing, resilience management, disaster recovery, communication management, and almost as importantly, especially if you're servicing external customers, your reputation management. I want to leave you with one more point on this. Business continuity management is about continuing business, providing business services. That's in the normal day-to-day activities. Again, I don't want anybody to leave today thinking that business continuity management is just for when things go bad. It's the whole point of it is to keep things from going bad. So I'm going to talk about the BCM framework, and then we're going to drill into one area of this, which is the assessment. But here's the framework, and you notice it's split down the middle into two areas: strategy and mitigation, right? The strategy is making sure that we keep things running, right? Mitigation is when strategy failed, right? So it's a two-prong approach. So you have the plan. Planning is ongoing, and it includes just about everybody. That it includes the same groups of people that are involved in common service data model, right, or CMDB. So the program maturity assessment and annual roadmap. Sometimes annual is too long to wait. from personal experience, and initially you might be doing these things quarterly. You have risk assessment and service prioritization. So I actually stole one of John's slides from 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to use it as an example of this. But at each area of the service data model, we're going to look at the business impact. We're going to look at the technical dependencies, including any third-party dependencies. We're going to look at the business processes and mapping those to IT applications and capabilities. We'll look at the recovery gap analysis, and then from that, we'll generate a site risk assessment. And then the design, making sure that all of these components are brought into our design decisions, continuity strategy and recovery options. As an example, if I'm bringing something into the environment that I cannot build a recovery or a return to normal service plan against, maybe I shouldn't bring it in. Then we're going to implement it. And once we've implemented it, we're going to exercise and test it routinely. And then we're going to go into that sustain and maintain area. So when we start talking about program maintenance, that's the plan. That's making sure that we have done proper enablement and training. That's testing all of the things, you know, for example, our communication plan. One of the biggest errors, or the most common errors I see organizations make, is that they create a communications plan that's dependent on the very technology that they are building mitigation plans against. So sort of tongue in cheek, but if you consider email went down and I send an email out to everybody letting them know that email is back up, right? Sounds funny, sounds like it would never happen. It is actually very common, that exact use case. Then we're looking in that plan, exercise, and test. We're going to pre-test the planning. We're going to conduct those tests, and then we'll pre-test the evaluation and reporting. So you're doing making sure that the plan is in place that keeps things from breaking, making sure that there's a plan in place that is tested, that returns to service after an outage, and then making sure that you've tested your post-incident process, right? And the reporting, because that third step, making sure that you've done a post-incident review is, I won't say it's the most critical, but it is extremely critical for your ongoing success. Then the part everybody's most familiar with, that's the recovery strategy and implementation, right? Initially, this is going to be very reactive, but you'll have resiliency plans, business continuity, disaster recovery, change management, emergency response, or crisis management, emergency response, et cetera. This is the part where everybody generally thinks about, right? But you'll notice it's just one aspect of it. So I'm going to touch on what I think is the most important aspect, and that's the assessment domains.
Hey, Scott.
So yes.
Before you go on, Jeremy, did he hit your question there in the end, or was it still unclear?
Oh, I didn't see the question.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting. I mean, I understand what a business continuity plan looks like, but at the end of the day, we're talking about an ordered system that is highly constrained, and so therefore, what could a strategy failure really look like? I mean, in a VUCA world that we live in, how can we say that, you know, like strategy fails? Well, did we get too specific in the strategy or the document?
Got it. So let me draw a brick wall line between strategy and the plan. So let's say initially, you're building this out. Your strategy might be a very manual process, and it might be like having hot backups in place, right? Or fast switchover options in place. So your strategy would be manual, it would be reactive, and it would only kick off in the event of a failure, right? The plan is how you would step through turning it back on, transitioning over. So while there's overlap between strategy and plan, the strategy is highlighting the fact that as we, and I think your answer is going to become more clear towards the end of the deck, but specifically automation versus manual processes, right? So you may have a manual strategy. I will tell you initially, I get most nervous when customers say, hey, we're going to have an automation strategy on day one, right? We're just kicking off and our goal is to have an automation strategy. Not necessarily the greatest idea, because automation allows you to make errors at a really fast pace, right? Whereas having a manual strategy where we're going to have a crisis management team, we're going to contact everybody, they're going to come into the building, everybody's going to have their own piece of the pie that they're responsible for. And then you build out the plan based on the strategy that you've chosen to go down.
Fair enough.
Does that answer your, okay? And we're going to touch on that again. It's a great question, actually. Thank you. And now I've opened up the chat, so I should be able to see these things as they scroll by. All right, so let's talk about assessment.
I'll keep an eye out for you too, Scott, in case.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. All right, the business BCM assessment domains, right? And I chose this one because personal feeling, not sure that others would agree with me, but I think it's the most important aspect of the entire process. Because this is where you're going to learn everything. You'll notice, by the way, the recovery strategy and recovery plans, separate pieces here. In fact, I can't build a recovery plan without a recovery strategy, but Gartner says BCM supports the recovery of essential business processes and includes the planning, the business resumption, recovering work area, and building workforce resilience. The most important part of that statement is the building workforce resilience. Highlighting the fact that we don't want things to go down. It doesn't matter how fast you recover. If you go down every day, you've got a bad plan, right? And according to the Gartner data, most organizations do not have a formal framework, or they choose to develop their own internally, and they'll follow things like ISO, NIPA, and those standards that are in place, feeling that that's going to give them the protection they need. So this is where I make one of those declarative statements, okay? The only process that's going to work is one that has been built inside your organization by members of your organization and has been tested within your organization. Two identical companies, they both make fuzzy widgets, and they both make fuzzy widgets using the same hardware and the same software, will have different business continuity plans. Right? And it's because so much more is involved in the technology and the logistics and the buildings and the hardware. It has a lot to do with the culture and the experience level of the people that are involved. I will make another declarative statement. The most successful business continuity management implementation I have seen to date was people who were not IT specialists in the areas that they were doing it. And it forced them to have a much broader imagination of what could potentially go wrong. So during the assessment domains, these are numbered because they go down in that order. The BCM governments, this is a formal structure to manage and govern the business continuity program. These are your policies, your scopes, your objectives, all of the decisions, who has the rights, the steering committee, budget and investment. I will tell you that the areas here that folks miss is the public sector government related requirements that are put in place. The business impact analysis, this is where we try to define and categorize the recovery requirements based on downtime impacts to the business over predefined periods of time. So the simple one here is, if HawaiianAirlines.com goes down for 60 minutes, what is the financial impact of that 1 hour outage? And it gives you how much money that you should. It should go back to the first one where we're giving you a budget that you're going to apply to this process. But that's the simple one, right? When we're going to start talking about reputation, and that becomes almost immeasurable. Then you have your recovery strategy. This is the approaches for work area recovery or workaround procedures. There is a linkage to IT for disaster recovery strategies and for integration. And again, as we get towards the end of this deck, where I'm going to give you some examples of how ServiceNow does this, this strategy has to be on your maturity model. And I'm going to provide that for you here, and it's something that you can take away and find out where you live on that maturity model. Then the plans, there's this recovery and continuity plans. These are the procedures for the workarounds and or to recover critical functions. Again, this is the what order we're going to do it, who's going to do it, and in what order. The strategy is what specifically is going to be done. And then the exercises. This is where we're going to actually exercise this management program. We're going to validate continuity. We're going to break stuff. We're going to flip breakers. We're going to deliberately cause situations where we're testing the process. By the way, I'm not testing that a database was able to fail over really quickly. I'm testing that failover. I'm testing the communication plan. I'm testing the reputation management. I'm testing the data loss. I'm testing all of those things. And I'm testing the team at the end of that, how well they gathered that data and then use it to improve the process going forward, which takes us to program management. So this is the process to monitor and manage the program, including the metrics, the scorecards, the training, the awareness, so that we're continually getting better. I'm going to go back one slide. This whole conversation that we just had is this step. It's half of this step, actually. Right? So this is why I was saying, I think we're going to want to have this as a jumping off point for future things. Now, I'm making an assumption, so feel free to put in the chat if it's an incorrect assumption, but I believe that most of us know what a CSDM is. So I'll leave this description up on the page there for a moment, and I'm going to step through a couple of things that just highlight the relationship between BCM and CSDM. But for those that, is there anybody on the call that does not have experience with CSDM, at least been exposed to it? All right, doesn't look like that's the case. Good. All right. I will point out something. CSDM leverages all ServiceNow products and the platform, and it's all about supporting true service level reporting. Okay. If we see this, you guys have all seen this slide before. In fact, the next slide is one I stole from John. But this is the CSDM 4.0. You'll notice I've added these little blue circles over here. This is business continuity management. It's the call out 1 point at every aspect. So you've gone down your CSDM path. You're very mature. You've identified your services. You've gone down that the innovation pipeline. You're building it out, right? Let's say you are 100% perfect in this area. You need to know that at each area, you need to have the BCM involvement. And when I say BCM involvement, I mean this entire framework becomes part of every of the 4 sections of CSDM. It is also very dependent on your foundational data. So the locations is where we're going to talk about here in a minute, because that's the one people forget about. But when we come over here, this is the innovation pipeline, right? This is where we're going to do plan, run, and build, and taking things from ideation through demand. We're going to build out that innovation portal. We're going to have the customers interacting with us. We're going to have the internal service portal. We're going to have all of these things out. Business continuity plays a part in nearly every aspect of this process. In fact, as I've dug through it, there's only a couple that I see that BCM doesn't necessarily have to play a role, ideation being one of them. But other than that, you're going to have a BCM aspect of everything that we do. Okay, I thought that was a new question, but there's not. So let's talk a little bit. I think I've hammered the point home. BCM is part of everything that we do from CSDM perspective. In fact, there's a inextricable relationship between the two once you've gone down the BCM path. So how's ServiceNow done it? Again, I'm going to focus on one portion of this, and this is the crisis management team. Now, up until this point, I've been hammering the point that it's not just about having emergency breaks, right? But I want to talk about this because the crisis management team is not just there when things are broken. They're also the team that you're going to identify because they're the ones that are going to make sure that you are considering all of the potential impacts to your BCM process. So we have the crisis management team, and they are supported by business continuity management, which is supported by BCM support. They're responsible for managing the crisis. They're responsible for keeping the crisis from happening. They're responsible for any events that might impact our people, our operations, our customers, our brand, and almost most importantly, our reputation. So of those 5 things that I just listed, only one of them was post-failure. Everything else was at least initially pre-failure. One other thing I want to point out here is you build the green teams. These are the core members of this process, right? These are the ones that you're going to be dealing with on a regular basis, but you may need to bring other people in. So let's say your BCM strategy was a hot failover and you were going to have an AWS environment that was kept up to speed. You're going to involve cloud operations in that portion of the conversation. That doesn't mean that cloud is going to be involved in every aspect of it or that they have to be formal ongoing members of the team, but at least for their particular areas of focus, they will have that. Another is you'll notice there are certain things that are not necessary. By the way, this is not my slide. And so I'm going to call something out. This is actually a ServiceNow BCM slide, but I'm going to call something out here because the other piece of this is that there is a consideration that these things are not necessarily mission critical, right? And I disagree, especially around finance and global technical support. Finance is also who pays our paychecks. And if on December 16th, you didn't get your December 15th payment, I think your reputation and the impact of your people is going to be massive, right? So a little bit of a disagreement there, but understand that the point being made here is that internally, ServiceNow's crisis management team has the core members, which is HR, legal, communication, IT, physical security, and workplace services. By the way, remember this is going to become critical here in just a moment. And then we also have ad hoc members that come in on a fairly detailed schedule: global technical, cloud operations, product operations, innovation strategy, sales, marketing, and finance. Any questions about ServiceNow CMT? All right, so let's go back to BCM Framework. Okay. Everything we're going to talk about now, from this point forward into this morning's presentation, I want you asking yourself, do we already, or how can we create a communication strategy and plan, and a reputation management strategy and plan? Target had an outage or had a breach that they knew about for 6 months before they notified the public. I personally believe, and all of the analysts that reviewed that breach will tell you, that the length of time from their knowledge of it to notifying the public was far and above the worst aspect of that breach. People were more upset about that than they were that their information had been shared. Communication and reputation are part of everything that we could do. So if we look at, by the way, the impact is going to, the people, the workspaces, technology or vendors, people includes customers, by the way, business as usual. We're at an acceptable operating level. This is where we're not going to send folks communication saying, hey, look, things are going as they should. We're going to know that. The communication here is we're going to be notified if things start to trickle down. Performance starts to take a hit outside of normal standards. When they do, we're going to do a response. This doesn't necessarily have to be that it's already down for it to be an emergency response. If my drives start filling up, or if suddenly I'm in a Taylor Swift ticket sales situation, I'm going to respond to that hopefully before that there's a major problem. And you'll notice level of performance has trickled down to a point where we're saying it's below the acceptable. It's not necessarily down. This is when you activate your crisis management team. You do not wait for it to be down to activate your crisis management team. How do I know which aspect of the business to respond to? And that takes us back to CSDM and the relationship between the two. In CSDM, you have identified your critical services. You know which ones you can't live without, right? Every component of the CSDM has a BCM relationship. So when I come back over here, let's say I got 20 things that are being impacted. I know which ones to target because I've done my homework during the CSDM process. We're going to recover all critical business functions. And sometimes, generally, that means we're going to recover the critical infrastructure and systems that support those critical business functions. And how do we know that? Technical managed, or the technical services. This is where the infrastructure lives. If we've got an issue going on down here, we got to the blue smokes coming out of a server, we know which business services are going to be impacted. We know which business capabilities are going to go down. And let's say my HawaiianAirlines.com, if a piece of infrastructure is starting to fail, and I know that it's directly related to HawaiianAirlines.com, I know that I need to respond immediately. And what do? First off, it's the business continuity plan activation. This means there hasn't been a failure yet, but this is the plan that I put in place to keep that failure from happening. Below that, this is disaster recovery. This is when the barn is already on fire, right? And it's the difference between the fire department and a fire extinguisher. I have a small fire, put it out with the fire extinguisher. If the whole building is on fire, I have to call the fire department. The fire extinguisher and the hoses are my strategy. The person that's been taught to use a fire extinguisher and the firefighters themselves are the plan. So again, we have our disruption or pre-disruption. We start the beginning recovery, and then we go through the restoring process. Business as usual is where we want to live. We're going to respond to that, and hopefully before there's a failure, we're going to recover as quickly as possible with the least amount of impact to our reputation, and then we're going to restore those operations. A part that's missing from this slide is what we do at the end of restore, and we'll get into that in a moment. But before we do, this is my first poll question, and this is, where are you on your BCM journey, or where are you starting on your BCM journey? You would be surprised at how many people use Excel and they're on that fingers crossed. At some of the biggest companies in the world, that's where they're at. Not because of arrogance, but because they don't think it's going to happen to them. Reactive, this is the manual operations, by the way. It is not an inappropriate plan, right? Again, initially I was saying that there is benefit to doing this from the beginning, but you have manual operations. They're reactively responding to those BCM activities. They have limited identification of responsible parties, limited program visibility, and disconnected from systems of record. Not bad, right? Not a bad place to start. This is where we can make mistakes at a slow rate and learn from them and move on. Basic is repeatable basic operations. Again, we've standardized our functions. We've got our gaps identified. We know what the program status is. We've got multiple connections to system of record. This is where we start flying. So crawl, walk, run really fast, and then fly. Ultimately, this is where you want to be. We want to automatically respond to these things. By the way, that does not mean that we do not still do our post-incident review. And it also doesn't mean that we're not constantly testing it. So where's everybody at in this BCM journey for the folks that are on the phone? And you can put numbers or just type in the manual, reactive, basic, managed, or orchestrated into the chat if we don't have the survey. And let's have a conversation about this, because this is where we're getting to the point where this is supposed to definitely be a give and take. So I'm interested in where folks are at. Anybody? You can come off mute as well.
Is anybody using their CSDM to support this as well? That'd be interesting to hear as well.
Yep. All right. Well, maybe everybody, I mean, can somebody other than John say something so I know that I'm not talking to myself? Anybody? Bueller?
Yeah, we're here, Scott.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Got nervous there for a second. All right. So wherever you're starting on your journey, this is where, like I said, I want to bring my friends from HMSA in on one of these calls, because they'll take you through this process. It's not an overnight process. Don't be embarrassed if you're here. You'll notice that as we go up, efficiency and effectiveness improve. And they improve in line with the maturity of your BCM process. A lot of customers, after about a year, 2 years maybe, you're basically swirling right around here. Okay. And this is, I think, the most important difference between basic and managed is the continuous monitoring of the processes. You know, people hear me say that and they think event management, that's part of it, right? But hardware asset management, what is my overall utilization of my server's compute power? If I'm consistently running above 90%, there's a BCM impact to that. Just like there's a BCM impact if I'm currently consistently running at below 20%. There's no reason to be setting $100 bills on fire just so that we can say there's no chance that we'll go down. All right, some key considerations. This is supposed to be a discussion point, so there's some things here that are missing, hopefully to drive the conversation. But off the gate, establish a culture of resilience. Notice I didn't say of recovery, right? Resilience means that we're not going to go down. And a solid BCM plan can be measured by the fact that it in and of itself reduces outages. The number one way that it does that is it keeps us from, or it expands our imagination. By the way, I see some answers. One with spreadsheets. Tina, thank you for that. And Sean is at level 2. Appreciate those responses. Tina, you are not the Lone Ranger, even though 2 of 39 responded. Believe me, there's a lot of folks on this call that are likely at level 1 as well. Step 2, obtain executive sponsorship. This is another one of those declarative statements that I make. If you do not have executive sponsorship, you are wasting your time. And here's why. You're going to be asking people to do more than they're currently doing. You're going to be asking for dollars in order to make that happen. And ultimately, you're going to be putting rules or guardrails in place that a lot of folks are not going to want to follow. Also, to have an effective BCM or CSDM process, you're going to be asking people to provide data on areas that they are not interested in providing the data on, right? You need an executive bulldozer in those situations. So obtain executive sponsorship. You're going to form, if you don't already have one, you're going to engage. If you do, your BCM or crisis response teams, your CSDM and your CSDM teams. And by the way, I say teams because you have the business side of CSDM and you have the technical infrastructure side of CSDM. So at least there's going to be 3 legs on that stool. Most important at this point is clearly define the roles. Lots of stuff available. ServiceNow provides it. It'll be part of that follow-up deeper dive section. Highly recommend that you engage expert help. That could be partners, it could be BCM practitioners. I don't want to make this a sales call, but ServiceNow offers a BCM solution and practitioners, and we have partners. At this stage, we're going to confirm and test our executive sponsorship, right? It's really easy to get somebody to say, yeah, I'll sponsor that. And then when it gets thick and it gets uncomfortable, their sponsorship or their support wanes. So you're going to confirm that. You're going to create and or review organizational change management plans. There are 2 separate viewpoints to this, right? One is to support business continuity long-term. This is the ongoing. This is when BCM is done. We're going to have an organizational change management plan in place, but also for the initial build out of those plans and the ongoing maintenance of those plans. Some people disagree with me when I say your BCM plans are configuration items. They should not be changed without going through organizational change management. And this is one of those evangelical arguments that I sometimes get in. And, you know, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But if those plans can change without oversight, they're not plans. They're just notes, right? Identify any in-flight projects that this process could impact. So example, CSDM is an in-flight process. And BCM is going to impact that, but also deployments of ServiceNow. If you're going to use ServiceNow as your system of record for this, there's going to be BCM impact on that. There's also going to be, let's say, technology refreshes, things like that, where we're going to be, you know, impacting that over. Maybe, and by impact I mean slow down. You need to identify those. Some of the examples, additional stories, additional testing may be required associated with that. You're going to plan for resourcing 3 separate work streams: CSDM service, CSDM technical, and business continuity management. Again, clearly define the roles and clearly define the relationships between all the areas. I'm going to ask a tongue-in-cheek question. Which one is most important? While I'm waiting on those answers, we're going to once again reconfirm executive sponsorship. Right? By the way, that is an ongoing process. You're going to continue to engage and test. They don't have to be in every meeting, but you have to engage and test your executive sponsorship. And then finally, our ultimate goal. The first one was to establish a culture of resilience. And it's tied to digitizing this program for the sole purpose of moving from reactive to proactive. And this is, again, going back to stop the outage, stop the failure. Once it happens, things are already bad, and you need to have a very fast process for returning to service as normal. But your goal of business continuity management is the continuity part, not the disaster recovery part. Some other things, and again, I did not include everything on here, but these are, I might be graphic, but I say these are written in blood, meaning much like rules are sometimes written in blood. These were things that were learned in the field, and as a result, they are on here. It is not an exclusively
Scott, you still there?
I think we lost him.
serial in nature.
Oh, Scott,
So
we lost you for about 10, 20 seconds.
Okay, am I back? What was the last thing you heard?
You were reading about 30 seconds. I forget what the last thing you were saying is, but
All right, let me come back over here because I want to talk about the last end here.
okay.
Hey, Scott, I
Digitize-
did have a question.
You bet.
How does the BIA fit into these considerations?
Meaning the person or
The business impact analysis.
impact assessment
process, yeah, or the assessment, analysis assessment, yeah.
Yeah. So, and this list, it really doesn't, because it either, I can say it doesn't, or it applies to every aspect of it, because each portion of this has a BIA role. If I come back to, if I don't have to go all the way back, this side's here, right? Every aspect of what we're talking about is going to play here in the assess and prioritize role. So when I start coming back to here, right, your business your business crisis response teams, your CSDM teams or whatever, they're all going to have BIA activities, but primarily it's going to come from the business side of CSDM.
Okay.
All right, I want to end on digitizing the program to move from reactive to proactive. The first step is to establish a culture of resilience. The whole idea there is to make sure that you don't go down, because once you go down, the damage has been done. And then you're just in a, minimize the damage perspective. What we want to do is be proactive and keep those outages from happening. Now, this might be graphic, but the next page is not an exclusive list. It's only a few things. Then I call them, I state that they've been written in blood, meaning that they were, they're on this screen because I've personally been involved in situations where these things were not done. Okay. Communicating to large groups, and you have to be prepared for that. Now, I'll give you an example of why that's so critical. If you're using ServiceNow and you're using email, you need to understand that those notifications are going to go out in serial, right? So the last person notified might be the most critical person that needed to be notified, but they're going to be notified last because for whatever reason, maybe their last name starts with Z, who knows? But you need to have a plan that allows you to communicate to large groups of people in parallel, meaning right now. Normal communication paths might be inaccessible. I gave you the tongue-in-cheek example of, notifying people via email that email had responded, but also the speed and scale of communication. If your BCM plan requires you to notify all of your customers of an outage, that could literally be thousands of notifications that are going out. And you need to manage things like how they want to be notified. Maybe I don't want to be notified via email. Maybe I only want to be notified via mobile, and I only want to be notified via mobile if it's a really big deal. Alternate work locations, believe it or not, this is a problem that a lot of folks will overlook, right? If the reason for your outage was a flooded data center, depending on hot backups in that flooded data center, not going to help you. So you need to look at infrastructure and access. We learned this during COVID. It was a very painful lesson. And that was because one of my customers, their BCM plan was that they were all going to move to a different building to work if their primary building came unavailable. And they all showed up, and that secondary building on the first outage was just closed. So they went, hey, that's not going to happen. We're gonna make sure that we have access to it. And on the second outage, about 30 days later, they showed up and they weren't allowed in the building because none of them were vaccinated. It was a failure of imagination. It was not a failure of the plan or the strategy. They just didn't consider what was possible there. Alternate data sources. I put hard copy in quotes here because people think that that's just insane, but you might need to have in some form, even if it's electronic format, you might need to have a portable copy of data that you're not depending on anything, including the internet or network infrastructure to get in place. Primary, and that's just recognizing that primary sources of data may be inaccessible. Now, I got two examples. One of them was a customer that created a static version of their business maps, their service maps. Some of them were very large. This is where you really start prioritizing what's critical. I'm not saying that you paint the whole inside of your building with your service maps or have them in such a way that you can navigate them without infrastructure in place. But if it is what is going to be required to get you up and running, it's something to consider. And then finally, at the end, a BCM solution or extensions to existing solutions. And I'll give you two examples of that. There are business continuity management solutions that basically are the overlays to CSDM, CMDB, all of your foundational data. And it'll put in place the documentation process, the strategy process, all of your communication plans, and the testing methodology for that. Spend a few dollars, you get one. Or you can extend your existing. And this is where some customers have just a few additional fields that are on their business services. They're literally on the CSDM classes or CMDB classes so that they're able to have these things in place. Neither is wrong, right? One's going to get you towards that automation process sooner than the other, but it's more important to have something. I'll tell you, if I had to pick one thing, it's at the top. It's the communications side of this thing. It is the most critical aspect of BCM, communicating to the people that are going to fix it and communicating to the people that were depending on it and can no longer access it. All right, key takeaways. The only animation in the whole deck. Establish a culture of resilience to move from crisis response mode to strategy mode. The underlying message there is BCM is the continuity aspect, not the disaster recovery aspect. Provide assurance to customers, vendors, and employees through regular, transparent communication. Communicate with me that you have a BCM practice in place, and maybe even communicate what that plan is. Because guess what I'm going to do? I'm probably not going to call and tell you how cool your idea is, right? I might feel that it's cool and that's great. But if I think there's something wrong and if I think you've missed something, I'm going to tell you about it, right? So make sure that you're providing assurance to your customers, vendors, and employees through regular, transparent communication. And then Holy Grail, digitize your program to move from reactive to proactive and scale with growth. Do not make this your initial target. It's more important that you have a plan, even if it's in Excel spreadsheets. Maybe it's just a phone list of people to call. But your goal is to digitize that program to move from reactive to proactive and the ability to scale with growth. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention. And I don't know how much time we have left, but if we do, I'm happy to have conversations.
We got about 10 minutes.
Perfect.
I'm going
Let
through
me
the.
see if I can open up the chat. Yes, Angela, you are 100% correct. Yeah, again, just having the communication with your even employees and vendors and customers, just that process will have huge returns.
Hey, Scott,
And Sean,
I'm gonna steal your share for a minute too, so we can open
All
up
right.
another conversation.
there you go. Oh, there's a lot of people here. Woohoo.
Yeah, anybody else have anything? The thing that I've been thinking about the whole time too is we talked a lot last year about where that person that owns the CSDM actually sits. And when we come down to all the things the CSM can do, we're looking at what actually gets done. And this is a list that we surveyed the group. We had about, I think, 95 people on a workshop. We built out some CSDM models. We're like, what are you doing this for? Right. So we had, I think the technical value, I think the BCM part sits more here on the business value side, right? So it'd be interesting to see kind of where that sits, and are the people that are actually, like, if people are a lot of times are working on CSDM for this stuff, right, to do change impact assessment and reduce mean time to recovery, do they actually have access? Like, are they, I don't want to say selling their data, right, but basically making sure that they know the BCM team. So I'm wondering if it's the CSDM team going to the BCM team, or is it the BCM team coming to the CSDM team? Like in the situations you've seen, I haven't run into a lot of BCM use cases in my customers, like people asking about it. And I know BCM's there. I just don't know if it's a matter of the people aren't connected enough to share that data, or, you know, kind of chicken and egg thing, right? So
Well, interestingly enough, John, and again, declarative statement, BCM is the reason for CSDM, right? It's literally the reason it exists. And if you go back to your blue slide, slide 10,
Yep.
each one of these, it's all about making sure that this stuff keeps working.
Yeah.
That's why it's there.
Yeah, it's the connectivity of the groups, right? The organization. Yep.
But sometimes customers will think, again, this is why I wanted to hammer the point. They hear business continuity management and they just think outage. They immediately go to outage. It's not about outage. It's about making sure that the service is continually available. So good slides.
Yeah, the thing up here, like if we go all the way back to your base slide, right? We have like the EA and the app owner owns this and the business. So we talk about like consumers of each of the sets of data, but we don't talk about the consumers as a whole, like who's consuming the whole model. And that would be the BCM team, right? Would be, so they don't own this little chunk or that little chunk, and they don't really, they're not consuming the services themselves, but they're consumers of the model, right? So it's really interesting to think. We always, a lot of this stuff falls into no man's land. That's what we've been struggling with. Like, hey, the EA's on this where they're putting their capabilities and apps in. The ops team owns this, and they all want to own their own chunks. But the holistic ownership of the CSDM models, a lot of times that falls on like the service, the you know, like Angela, like the person that owns the whole ServiceNow platform, because it's kind of in no man's land. The EAs are like, we don't want to own it, and then they're like, oh yeah, I want to own the apps that I support. But there's nobody that, you know, the overall modeling itself kind of falls into no man's land. And if it was owned by somebody, the CSDM itself would be a product that has consumers of it, like the BCM team or like the financial team, right? If we get it down to all these. So I still think people haven't arrived there yet, where this model to run the business and to give people access to information, like the BCM team needs access to see, you know, who do I need? Who are all my stakeholders?
Yep. Who do I call when it's broke too? Or who do I call to keep it from breaking?
Yep.
You have a lot of this data, folks, by the way. You have a lot of this already in place. Look at your change to against business service, your approval list, right? You know who these people are.
Yep.
Also your service owners, your technology owners, your EAs, your BAs, all of these people that are in place. My favorite person to contact is whoever's managing your stories, right? That they know everyone, right? They're a really good resource for you to go to is whoever's managing your stories for your software development. They're going to know who to call.
Cool.
Awesome.
Interesting use case. Yeah. Good
Yep.
stuff, Scott. Appreciate you sharing.
So I wanted to say thank you. This is my first one for this program. I don't think it'll be my last. I hope it's not my last. I guess I'll find out later. But I look forward to working with all of you and hopefully meeting some of you at Knowledge. And if you haven't signed up for Knowledge, go sign up for Knowledge.
Good deal.
All right.
I want to go through, spend a little bit of the last few minutes just on some content. So we don't have anything scheduled right now for our next 2 meetings. And we do want to get our February schedule out there. So if there is anything you're working on, anything you're teeing up for the beginning of the year, get it my way, and then we'll try to line up some speakers for you. The stuff that we went over today, so we do have our YouTube playlist, and there was, this topic is of special interest to you, we did have another session on BCM. I wanted to go back a while, right here, back about 8 months ago. So this is another session where we had our product manager in speaking about this, and then also, so if you want to get another take on it, or basically another use case for BCM, that would be a good one to watch. And I'll link that in there just so you guys have it.
You guys like to say hello?
And we'll put that in there. And then if you guys, like I said, if for content, does anybody have anything they're looking to get out of this forum? Any type of thing you're like itching to have come up? We can have Mark on to talk about CSDM again. We can invite Scott. We can have Caitlin on to talk about DPM. Anybody using DPM? Any of those things, or we can revisit stuff that we've done like a couple years ago, some of it. And if there are things, I know everybody's a little shy on the call, but if there are things, you can send them my way and we'll get that teed up on the itinerary. So there are things, integrations with APIs. Okay, SPM is another one. Okay, SPM and the alignment with. So Gerald, what do you mean specifically on APIs? There's a lot of ways I can read into that one. Are you talking about the modeling of that part, or? Oh, okay, Gerald has mic problems. I don't know, like a lot of times with APIs we get into, are they defined as microservices in the models, and how do we support those from a model perspective? I don't know if that's what you're looking for. That's what my assumption would be if. Okay, good deal. Some complex use cases of CSDM modeling. Okay, we did have, so we did have trials and tribulations of CSDM implementers, and we went through some pretty complex CSDM models. Do we want to go through more of those? Is that the type of, was that on the right lines? Because that was the impetus for those calls, was to get people that have actually done some pretty deep models on the call. Okay, Snow App Dev best practices. Okay. All right. Thanks for all the feedback in the chat. I'll take that out, and we'll get some topics around those lines and have those sent out. Now, if you haven't noticed, the way that we're doing this is we're sending out once a month, we're sending you notifications. We're trying to limit the notifications we're sending you for this group. So once a month, we're going to give you an email, and that's going to tell you that these are the next 2 meetings for, so you'll get an email saying, here's the 2 February meetings, and then it's up to you to register for those. So we'll get those out to you, and we'll see you on the next few meetings. So Scott, thanks again for presenting. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you all in a few weeks.
All right. Thanks for having me. Have a great week, guys.